Welcome back to the Wellbeing in Practice podcast, bringing you the latest in complementary, integrative, and functional medicine conversations. I'm Tanya Borowski, Head of Education here at Amrita, and your host. And today I have with me the wonderful Emma Beswick, who is the CEO and founder of the nutrigenomic company Lifecode Gx. And Emma is also a fully qualified nutritional therapist. And we are going to be talking today all about nutrigenomics. Welcome to the podcast, Emma.
Thank you, Tanya. And of course, this is my favourite subject.
Of course it is. Of course it is. So, Emma, I have known you for many, many years, and I'm sure a lot of the practitioners and their clients listening have heard of you. But I think it would be really interesting for our listeners to understand the backdrop to why you started Lifecode Gx and sort of what led you into being this. And actually on your website, which quite correctly, you say that you're entrepreneurial, which absolutely you are. Can you tell us a little bit about your backstory as to why and how Lifecode Gx was formed?
Oh, thank you for that. So about 12 years ago, I had a bit of a major family crisis, really, because my mum passed away. And that really gave me a lot to think about. And, this is the case for so many people in their own midlife or at a point in their life when they assess what the heck they are doing with our amazing life, and whether it really is gonna make us feel that we made the most of it at the end. And so I'd spent lots of years, decades, working in corporate life, mainly in technology. Started off doing really low-level tech stuff, doing programming, and then became an analyst, then became a project manager, then a program manager. And but what I really loved about that was the analytical part of it, the getting in deep, the understanding of how things worked, what the flow was, how things connected together. But as I've been promoted, and this happens so often in careers, I was getting further and further away from the aspect of it,
doesn't it?
that I enjoyed. Yeah. So together with my actual job becoming less satisfying and this midlife crisis, I decided that I would retrain in nutrition. And because I'd always been interested in health, and I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do in health, but I just thought it would give me some space to study and to just settle and think, and hopefully to be inspired to do something different. And we went to the same nutrition college.
We did.
We did. And that college, CNM, at the time was very progressive in that it was one of the first places in the country, or indeed the world, to teach nutrigenomics. So we had a lecture, and we're going to talk about what nutrigenomics is, but we actually had this lecture on nutrigenomics, and I had this huge anticipation even ahead of that lecture, because I thought this might be the thing that I was looking for. And it turned out that it absolutely was.
Wow, Emma.
Yeah. So I think it initially floated my boats because it was a combination of nutrition, health, and a little bit of, well, a lot actually of what my background, data, exactly, data.
Yeah.
So I thought rather than all that being wasted, I could actually make use of it and combine it with what I hoped would be my new thing, and do it in a way that would actually make a difference to people's lives in a really positive way. So I thought I'd hit on this thing that I'd always hoped to find. And then I obviously did every test that was available at the time.
Because there weren't many we will talk about nutrigenomics, but there weren't many nutrigenomic companies around back then.
No, it was mainly 23andMe. So 23andMe was making headlines.
Yes.
And, you know, so people probably know what 23andMe is. It's now a huge company that I think is part of Google or related to. And they test your genome and produce all kinds of analyses and reports, some of which are about health, some of which are about how Spanish or Neanderthal or whatever you are. So they kind of look at your history, heritage, and try and work out, you know, all of that stuff. Some of it is a little bit of fun. It's not particularly accurate. Other parts of it are, I think, very, very genuinely useful, and they are doing good things. But at the time, I used it as research for my own purpose.
Yeah.
And then when we first set up the company, we actually did use data from 23andMe as our source for analysis. So people could put their 23andMe data into our webpage and we would generate reports. We moved away from that model fairly quickly because we didn't want to be beholden to a big anonymous company that you can never speak to anyone there, you have no control over what they do with your information, no control or idea of partnership in terms of a business to business arrangement. So they fairly regularly change the scope of what they test, and that is for their own purpose. It's their own discretion to do that, but we didn't want to be dependent on something that we had so little control, but also, you know, we were always going to be the small guy compared to them. And then there were certain ethical things that I personally struggled with in terms of data sharing and big pharma collaboration and what your information was used for. So we looked at how typically within the integrative health and functional medicine and nutritional therapy world, people work. And obviously there are lots and lots of different testing companies that specialize in different things. And the model is really to offer a service that is good quality, that is trusted, that is transparent, and that supports practitioners as well. And there was very little offering in that space at the time. So, you know, companies who offered a little bit of genetic testing alongside
what their other and I think this is quite common in, I mean, maybe in all businesses, but in the testing world, it's far better to be to specialize in a specific in a certain type of testing, whether that be stool testing, whether that be nutrigenomic testing, but trying to be everything to all in the integrative functional world means that you move further away from really being able to specialize and be able to offer truly usable knowledge, because the people behind it really truly understand the literally the nuts and bolts of it. And your reports, well, in fact, let's just go back and just say, okay, so you set up a nutrigenomic company. So let's just really clarify what that is. And then I think then I'd like to let's talk about the different reports and sort of how those can be woven into a clinical practice for nutritional therapists. So
Yeah.
nutrigenomics, how would you explain that so practitioners can use that in their own way to explain to their clients?
I'll give it a bash.
Come on, Emma.
How many times have I said this? And
I know. What's your
over?
elevator pitch?
Oh, so we are looking at genetic code. We're looking at all the letters in the code, and we're assessing where your code differs from a reference genome. So it's as if there is this common set of DNA, call that a reference genome, and then actually every real person in the world differs in their genetic code compared to that reference genome. We're all unique unless we are an identical twin, and even then there are probably small differences in the genetic code. So we are looking for these very small single letter changes in the code that can alter the way your genes express. So that means how active certain genes are and how they perform, how they function. So we'll come to what the gene is in a minute. But the most important thing about nutrigenomics, as opposed to just genomics as a whole, is that every single thing that we test for is actionable, and mostly through diet and lifestyle. So
that's it, my friends, in a nutshell. That is it.
Yeah. So it's never bad news. It's never, oh, really sorry, I've got some really bad news for you. It's, hey, here's some information that is your power. You now have this information that there was no other way of having, no other way of knowing. And now you can alter, adjust, tweak, tune your nutrition and lifestyle to actually support your own unique genetic makeup. And that can be proactive. It can be about looking ahead and understanding what your risks are and preempting and preventing. Or it can be, I know that I haven't felt well in this way or that way for a long time, but no one's been able to work out why. Often the genetics can be the answer. It can help you to understand that this aspect of my biochemistry was just struggling all along because it didn't have a particular nutrient in the right form, or it didn't have enough of it.
To be able to allow the gene, as an example, to be expressed.
Yeah, exactly. So it's as if for a gene codes for a protein, and that can have a function. So it can help to make a hormone, break down a hormone. It can help to initiate your immune system, kick it into action. But some people's code means that those proteins are a slightly different shape and they function differently. So most often the function would be less, it would be slower, but sometimes there are variances in the DNA that actually pump up the volume and give that person perhaps a more powerful aspects to their biochemistry that makes them better at something in some way. So
OXO3.
Yes.
Okay, sorry, excuse me. Sorry, excuse listeners. Emma just couldn't resist a little geek out there. So, which leads us on to beautifully, actually, then why the way that Lifecode display this information so well pictorially in different reports rather than just a whole list of certain genes. And so one that everyone has heard about, and in fact, I was talking to a practitioner the other day who said to me, quote, my client has been through a fertility clinic, has been diagnosed with MTHFR. I was like, okay, well, that doesn't even make sense. Instead that you can't, is that, but the point is that actually that's just one tiny, tiny gene. Yes, it's important, but only when you look at it in context of, in this case, the whole methylation cycle. It's never about one gene or one variant, is it? It's about, because you're looking at sort of, from everything that Emma's just said, if you think about this as an analogy of, this is a keyboard, these genes and these variants are the keyboard of your life, that if one particular key is just slightly off tune because it's missing the key confounding nutrients that it needs to operate effectively, then if you supply those, I can identify that, and you can tweak or modulate, as Emma's just said, that one particular key with the right nutrients and the environmental factors that help to support it express itself, then the tune on the keyboard will sound clearer and
Yeah.
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 So
And I think with a piano analogy, you know, you can imagine someone performing a really complex piece of music and hitting one wrong note in
yes,
amongst all the business. They might be able to get away with that, and only some people would notice, the very, very attentive, knowledgeable ones. But the more wrong notes there are, the more dissonant, the more wrong that would sound. So, and it might depend whether those wrong notes are all in the same place. Like, are you dependent on that particular key, or could you
yeah,
improvise around it?
yeah,
So I think that's a really good analogy. We can get away with some things. No
of course we
one's
can.
perfect.
Yeah,
But it is about the whole. And the MTHFR is so often blamed just on its own for ill health.
yeah.
You name it,
Mm-hmm.
MTHFR's probably got, you know, the blame, it's up there. But some people can have a perfect MTHFR gene, and the genes around it are the ones that are problematic. So
Which was why you do these amazing reports that actually you can look at visually and really sort of map where the glitches are, or where the glitches are, so that you can work upstream and really and be able to identify where in those cycles the best support is needed.
yeah, absolutely. So for example, for people who want a little bit more detail on MTHFR,
Yeah.
that's the short code for a gene that activates folate. So
Mm-hmm.
it is the final step in making something called methyl folate. And methylfolate is very, very biologically active. And one of its functions is to circle folate around and around so that it's ready to help make DNA and new cells. So hence the link with fertility. That's one link with fertility. You're growing a baby, you need that cell division to be supported. The other important job of methylfolate is the methyl, hence the name methylation and this big word that people are talking about a lot these days. But the methyl gets passed onto another cycle, and that helps to recycle homocysteine. So all these things, they're like lots of roundabouts or cogs interacting and going around, and it helps to make something called SAMe. which is a master methyl donor. And I think of that as this magic dust that just keeps all of our cells turning and doing their thing, and keeps everything calm. It's as if Sammy is the conductor of the orchestra. It knows when to quieten down the brass section and when to lift another section, and those sections are like groups of genes. It's like time for the detox phase to happen, time to go to sleep, and it's performing this regulatory coordination effect on our whole bodies.
Beautifully put. So this is why actually going in with large doses of, I think we can say sort of like the end resource, so either methylfolate or SAMe, which actually we can't in the UK, but it could be, I'm going to say fraught with danger, but it can be if we don't sort of understand the whole process, which is what we can understand by looking at your reports, because you actually map out what you only test genes that are reportable and that there is very, very strong, robust literature on. And then you map those out in terms of a very usable report where you can actually see the flow of the production line, basically. So you can be much more clear when you're working in clinical practice about where the best intervention is going to be. And invariably, less is more. It's about taking smaller steps more gently to be able to tweak these expressions to allow that, because the body is always trying to do what it's to be able to operate in the best way possible, right?
Yeah, it just needs sometimes a little bit of extra help here and there, but the here and there is very personal. And so that's why, for example, we as a company do not sell supplement.
Yep.
Or there are lots and lots of companies that do this. They'll do a test, and lo and behold, the solution, no matter what your result, is to buy their supplement.
Sure.
And usually there's just one choice. And actually what we do as independent reviewers of your genome is that is the key to knowing what you need, as opposed to just what the average person may need. So it's a fine tuning. I was speaking to a practitioner this morning, and we were discussing methylation, and she was like, I use a methyl B complex for this patient, but this shows that she does need extra B12, and she doesn't have B12 particularly in her diet. So for this person, she needs a certain combination of B vitamins plus some extra B12. And she might also, she would actually, this particular person, really, really benefit from some extra choline. Now, you could take 2 methylation reports, and together with understanding what that person's lifestyle is, this is ever so important, you could come up with, or you should arrive at very, very different conclusions as to what is needed or what is beneficial for those 2 people.
Yes.
It's not a case of everybody needs the same methylation complex and their methylation is going to be okay. For some people, that could push some parts of the process too quickly, and other parts of the process would still be struggling. So it really, really is truly personalised, and enabling that personalised approach to nutrition and lifestyle.
Which is why these reports fit so beautifully into a nutritional therapy practice, an integrative medicine practice, because they've
because that's what those practices for a long time now, actually. I mean, just because it's not that well known or hasn't been historically doesn't mean that these practices haven't been around for a long time. But personalised nutrition is not a new thing.
no.
It's something that has been practiced probably for eternity, but certainly, however several decades ago, the personal nutrition world started to become more formalized, and that industry started to evolve. And what do we mean by that? Well, it doesn't necessarily include looking at genetics. You can sit and take a case history and talk to a client about their health concerns and symptoms and family history and all of that, and that's very, very, very valuable. But the nutrigenomics adds a whole new dimension to that picture, and sometimes it is the missing link and the thing that just joins everything together.
Yeah, and I as long as one, as in being the practitioner, we understand it, a lot of our clients do really like data. And as long as if we can guide them with what that data means, and absolutely that it is actionable, and that is very much, which is where you started this, is that you can run something through 23andMe, but what Lifecode offer is everything is actionable. And like you say, it's not just about a list of supplements. It's integrating maybe a supplement that might bridge a gap, but it is also providing diet and lifestyle advice around what these reports offer.
Absolutely. So someone might think they have a very healthy diet, and that diet may well be very good for their friend or their husband or their kids, but it doesn't mean that it's right for them. And so if they're all eating the same way as each other, one person might be thriving and the other person might actually be really, really struggling. We can do a lot through food, but we also often can benefit from some help with supplements.
Oh yeah, for sure. Absolutely. Can we use, let's maybe use an example of that. So if we think about sort of one of the reports that, I mean, I use all your reports all the time, but if we think about, say, like the nervous system report, which is so helpful in many different client cohort settings. And so first of all, could you explain sort of what your nervous system report covers? And then maybe we can go into some examples of what type of client and how diets can differ depending on what those reports throw up.
Yeah, that's a great idea. So the nervous system report looks at neurotransmitters, and the key neurotransmitters are serotonin and melatonin. I'll class that in the same thing because I always visualize a pathway.
Yeah,
so
me
we've got
too.
serotonin actually is a precursor to melatonin, so that's all in one pathway. Then we have dopamine and adrenaline, and then we have glutamate, the really most prolific excitatory neurotransmitter, and GABA, which is its opposite, the inhibitory neurotransmitter. So I think everyone can imagine what we mean by excitatory. It's that kind of stimulatory kind of aspect. By inhibitory, I think, GABA is really, really important. It's such a unique neurotransmitter, really, in that way. I mean, there are others, but it's the major inhibitory
Absolutely.
neurotransmitter, and that helps us calm down, wind down. It helps us relax. And if we don't have enough of it, it's not so much about excitation, but more about anxiety. Not being able to sleep, for example, can be due to not being able to turn your GABA system on at the right time. And with all these things as well, I've got a visual that shows a clock of neurotransmitters and how all of them have an important role to play, but actually at different times of the 24-hour clock. So we don't want our excitatory neurotransmitters popping up at 9 p.m. But we actually do want them at 11 o'clock in the morning when we're supposed to be productive, for example.
Yeah.
So they've all got really important jobs to do, but timing is everything. And we can use that report to really usefully, I'm going to say it because I love the term, what makes you tick as an individual? What makes, what are your strengths and weaknesses? What are your powers? What are your vulnerabilities when it comes to these neurotransmitters? And it's probably my favourite of all the reports.
Oh my goodness, I never knew that. She said it. Okay.
I know, it's like children. You're not supposed to have a favourite.
No, you're
hey.
not. But no, I get it. And also the endocannabinoids are on there as well. So
yeah, exactly. So it's incredibly fascinating because often with mental health, we use labels to describe things, but those labels are very imprecise. So, if someone says they're anxious, what does that mean?
Yeah, for sure.
What does it mean biochemically? There could be lots and lots of different things going on behind that anxiety. It could be that someone is feeling really jittery and adrenaline and kind of shaky, or it could mean that they feel quite low and subdued. It is so many different things, but we could actually, it's as if we need the however many words for snow that Eskimos have. Anxiety as a term isn't enough, but if we start to look at the drivers behind that, the chemical imbalances that can help to explain how we feel and behave, and more importantly, how we can adjust that feeling and behaviour. There are going to be other factors as well. There are going to be environmental aspects. What someone said or done, what pressures are you under, etc., etc. But for example, anxiety, a big or common factor in that is low GABA. So it's very strongly associated with social anxiety, for example, but also generalized anxiety disorder. And it could be that GABA itself is quite low because people have small differences in their genes that mean they're not as efficient at making it. And they might do better if they've got a little bit of a push from the right proteins, the right amino acids, and for making GABA, B6 and zinc are both important.
And of course, protein. I mean, these are all amino acid derived. So you need to be really, this is not, but we do need to be thinking as nutritional therapists about our clients' diet. So veganism and plant-based foods, and I'm not anti them, but we do need to be if we're truly working beyond the label, which is what we're is what with this information, then we need to be able to use all the resources that facilitate and that can bypass these adaptations. Is that's or can help? Yeah.
Yeah, no, exactly. And they are adaptations, and that's another aspect of the genetics. Why do we have these variants? It's because actually, as a species, it's more beneficial as a whole to have people with different strengths and weaknesses. So the different threats in our environment might wipe some people out, but others would survive. Or as a tribe, it makes sense to have someone who's really perhaps hyper vigilant and able to spot the slightest movement, but other people who are the calming forces and the safety and the kind of home making types of individuals, it's beneficial to every form of life to have variety for the survival of the species. It's that profound. So having a variant, some people call these things mutations.
No.
And I really don't like that term. It
No,
sounds as if it's, it sounds as if it's wrong. It's something that's wrong.
It's a tiny variant.
Yeah.
It's a tiny
Yeah.
change. Yeah.
Exactly. But if some of these things are clustering together, so for example, with the GABA, you could look and see, are there lots and lots of SNPs that are all on this particular pathway?
Yes.
And even just flicking through at a really super high level without looking at any detail, seeing clusters of variants is an indicator to look deeper, because this aspect of that person's biochemistry is likely to be more vulnerable.
Yes.
So at a glance, is it that serotonin is a weak point? Is it that GABA? Is it that etc.? And it helps you to dig deeper and then to work on the nutrition and make sure that it is supported, and lifestyle too,
Yeah. And with medicate, so you can look at the serotonin pathway and, as you said, the GABA pathway and glutamate, which is excitatory. And if somebody's if they've been given that label of depression, for example, and if they've been prescribed an SSRI, which we know is a very, very, very commonly prescribed medication, if we can look at that serotonin pathway, it may, and I've seen this on numerous occasions, that actually that serotonin pathway is pretty clean. It's actually either the dopamine or the GABA pathway, which needs infinitely more support and love and literally
exactly
tucking into bed than it needs more attention.
Absolutely. And we all know that prescribing is done in a very compressed time frame, usually, and so it's a case of try this, see how you feel on it, and there is an element of it's guesswork unfair. It's just a system which is, this is the first pass, try this first, etc. But we can do more harm than good by getting it wrong. And wouldn't it be infinitely better for everybody if it was closer to right first time? Whether that's a medication or a food or a lifestyle aspect. And it can be super motivating, I think, as well, to understand why you are doing a certain thing. For me, that's how it works.
Without doubt. Yeah. It's incredibly motivating and empowering I've seen so many clients who are just completely fascinated by these reports and it provides so many aha moments as to things drop into place and things things make a lot more sense.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And sometimes it's actually quite an easy fix. That's the thing. So people can struggle for years, and then it's this aha, and it can mean that then they know from that point on that this is how to support themselves. You know, it's that big. And often by supporting yourself in one dimension,
Yeah,
it has beneficial effects in another.
of course, because the body
So,
is, yeah, absolutely.
like, we're using B6 all over the place, but imagine, you know, we looked on the GABA pathway and we test a gene there that is impactful in it processing B6, and it actually breaks it down and removes it.
ALP, is it not?
Yes, it is. Wow.
Oh,
It's like, yeah, the top trumps of genes. Tanya, you win. But yeah, so if you know that you break down B6 more quickly, then B6 is a specific vitamin that for you need more intake. But we use B6 also to make dopamine, also to make serotonin, also for methylation.
methylfolate, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So it's you get many benefits just for learning one thing.
Yeah. And
So
that's actually why I invariably would recommend, so you would choose, you would not choose, but depending on your client, what the client sat in front of you, you would select a particular report. So let's say the nervous system report, but you would pretty much nearly always want to have the methylation report alongside that, because you're literally like making a jigsaw. So you can have, because the methylation just sits across like a safety net across all of these reports, because you need those methyl donors, which is the fairy dust, across all of these other reports as a cofactor to make neurotransmitters, to make hormones, to synthesize hormones, to remove hormones, for receptors to be receptive.
yeah,
And that's, yeah. So the methylation kind of is if you like, is the center. Would you? And
yeah.
yeah,
I think it's one of them. I mean, if you think about vitamins, you know, vitamins, essential nutrients, they
yes,
are the foundation of lots and lots of things. So if you pull, it's that bit like a plug, you know, if you're pulling, or Jenga, if you're pulling one of those
yeah,
really fundamental things out of the mix, then it's going to have bubble effects all over the place. But yeah, methylation, we started with that, and it is so fundamental. It's kind of the next cog up, really. It's if you've got all these individual vitamins, but together they work to make the methylation roundabouts go round, the cogs run smoothly. So yeah.
great. Okay, so before I let you go, I can't let you go, though we've talked about your favorite. I now know what that is. Your newest report, although which is now a year old, I think. But
Yeah,
I
it's
mean, it
about a
is
year
a
old.
mammoth. This is your new baby, and it's like having twins, actually, because
It was very
because
painful.
it was painful, and it is a double, and literally is a double report, isn't it? So,
Yeah.
which is the metabolics report. And obviously we won't go into massive depth, but I would love you to just sort of top line what type of setting you find clinicians are using this in most successfully. I mean, you could use it in any, but I would just love for you to sort of to maybe help guide practitioners when they think that might be really helpful for them to run the metabolics report.
So it's all about energy.
Mm-hmm.
And we need energy for everything. So energy, there are conditions, there are symptoms that are associated with low energy directly, like chronic fatigue, for example. And one of the pathways in that report is mitochondria, the powerhouses of our cell. There are tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of them in each cell, or there should be. And these tiny, tiny little things, we've dug deeper and looked at how they work, what nutrients are involved in the mitochondria function, and also how those are impacted by genetics. So, for example, there are some uncoupling proteins, UCPs, that clean up the kind of smoke fumes that are produced from burning fuel. So this is what mitochondria do. One thing that they do that is very important, they take in fuel, whether that's carbohydrate sourced or protein or fat, and they oxidize it, which means it's effectively made into energy. But as a result, there are hydrogen ions. I'm getting really technical here, but
no, it's okay.
I think of it as the pollution that is produced as a side effect of that energy creation, and uncoupling proteins basically clean that up. And some people have got really, really genetically efficient uncoupling proteins, and some people aren't so lucky. And so understanding that can help to understand why some people's mitochondria need more nurture and more looking after than others. And that could include more antioxidants and anti-inflammatory support. It could also be things like exercise. So, big topic, huge topic, but we talk about it a lot, don't we, Tanya?
We do.
How important, like, you need movement to make energy, and it might sound counterintuitive, but you will be more energized by exercising ultimately. So because stressing your system in a appropriate way, for example, through movement, actually teaches and messages the mitochondria to regenerate and multiply and become more functional. It's like working a muscle, but it's at this tiny level. You are training them, you are building them, you are creating that resilience and that power. And it's really, really useful, I think, for people to understand why their approach, again, to things like exercise, to things like fasting, should perhaps be different from their best friend, or the person that they saw on Instagram last week. And yeah, it's huge. And things like, if we look back to COVID, a lot of people who got or experienced symptoms of long COVID or long COVID type fatigue, the mitochondria dysfunction was a big factor in that. So why did some people have a really, really bad time and other people didn't? I'm not saying it was all about the mitochondria genetics being different, but absolutely that was a factor for a good proportion of people. So there's that aspect. And then there's well, why am I overweight aspect? Have I got particular risks to fat storage in the wrong places? Are my fat storage genes actually a superpower or a burden? Because actually fat storage biochemically up to a point is a superpower. It's what gives us resilience. to a change in environment where maybe food isn't abundant. That's why, as humans, as mammals, we have the ability to store fat. And it becomes a problem when that fat storage capacity is exceeded, and that tissue then becomes dysfunctional. And genetically, we have different capacities for fat storage. Some people can store a lot before that capacity is exceeded.
Hypertrophic,
exactly. And other people have less bandwidth to play with. Again, understanding some of these details helps you to know why you might have less bandwidth than someone else.
Yes.
And not blame yourself, like, because you didn't know in the first place. But now that you do, you actually have the power to do something that nurtures your tissue and your own genetics in a way that you wouldn't have had any way of having that insight before.
And that's super interesting, Emma, because, and Lara Briden uses this expression of, we are living in a environmental mismatch of our genes and our environment. That is just the nature of how the 21st century. So so an individual is born with that genetic predisposition. So let's use the fat storage as an example. But if you were born, but sort of, we are in a society where we are literally just trying to override every adaptation that we were born with, because everything is in abundance. We are living in a society where literally everything is abundant, and we are so overwhelmed by that. So what this metabolics report is, it highlights appetite, sort of satiety, and nutrient sensing. It's able to look at whether you are, how well you metabolize the major substrates, proteins, carbohydrates, fats. And it also looks at the cell membrane integrity. And what I love is the antioxidant cascade inside of the mitochondria, which help to extinguish and try and mitigate all of these exhaust fumes and reactive oxygen species that are produced as a result of this sort of abundant lifestyle that we are immersed in. So I mean, it is
and
really,
historically, we would have been alternating and oscillating between these different environments. So there would be times of plenty, and then times of famine, and times of, hot and cold. And flexibility is what we're built for. We're built to be able to tolerate and respond to these different stressors. A bit like, we're familiar with immunity and how our immune system develops. We have to be exposed to something in order to respond to it. And that's the same with having less food as well as more food. So our body likes to be stretched and stressed within certain boundaries, and it keeps it flexible, and it keeps it adaptable. Metabolic flexibility is, a fairly popular term now, but it really, really is the key to everything. And so, what is it about fasting that is good or bad? What sort of fasting is right for you? You can look at these pathways and understand that perhaps this pathway that is all about energy deficit needs a little bit more push, or it could tolerate that push more than someone else's, or maybe not. And it's almost retraining ourselves and appreciating that if we don't use these pathways and these aspects of our biochemistry,
Yeah.
then we will lose it. We'll lose that ability and we will become rigid and intolerant to anything that, when in history have people just eaten 12 times a day,
Yeah.
constantly
Yeah.
snacking
Or
out
3
sickly with a
times a
drink.
day, and,
Yeah.
and then having a, I mean, it is, and a snack and a sort of,
Yeah.
absolutely. It is. And it's interesting, isn't it? Because we're always looking for the next hack or the next diet. I mean, how many diet models are there? And in our, I was going to say, in our career, how many different diet models have risen to fame and have been sort of the way that, and they've come in, woven their way into nutritional therapy, um and then sort of ebbed off again, and
Yeah.
actually it's, I haven't really, it's interesting, isn't it? And at the end of the day, you come back to very simplistic mechanisms. Well, these aren't simplistic mechanisms, but
Principles.
principles of, well, of course, you want your metabolism, the ability to create cellular energy. It's going to respond and adapt to the environment. We want it, and that's what flexibility is. And like,
Yeah. And we like to alternate. So, we don't like to burn resources to make fuel at the same time as we're storing them. It's like, do we need energy or have we got an abundance? Like, where are we? And we have all these amazing sensors and systems to work this out and balance things out. But if we're constantly in a state of abundance, then we lose the tolerance to not be. And I remember as a kid, I did 12-hour fasting. That was normal.
it was
12-hour fasting
normal.
now,
Yeah, it was normal.
it's like you'd have breakfast at 7 and you'd have your dinner at 6. And that was my childhood. So that now is considered some special kind of biohacking that is fasting.
You didn't have you weren't allowed a Milky Way.
Or a cup of cocoa. Oh no, wasn't that only at weekends, the
Yeah,
chocolate?
no, yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So, but that was the natural. We were closer to nature, even a lot closer to nature 40 years ago than we are today.
Totally.
Things have changed in the wrong direction, and we're not using our our natural strengths, our natural systems. And I do think if you don't, then you just become this one, I can only exist in one mode.
Yeah. And that's it's that it becomes very very reductive. That's the word I'm looking for. And we don't, and inflexible when we're just trying to stick to these, let's face it, really quite grim regimes. That you can do a bit of fasting, but it doesn't need to be quite so rigid.
No.
Anyway, I think you've been incredibly generous with your knowledge and providing us and with a more than an insight into the benefit of utilizing Lifecode Gx reports and nutrigenomics in your practice. And we will be doing a lot more education with Emma and collaborating with Lifecode at various educational events. And I just really, just if you're just, it is an area that I think I've listened to your methylation lectures. I think I've probably attended 20, back in the day when you were doing those in-person ones. And so I'm sure, and I will continue to, because this is an area, like everything that we work with, that every time you hear it, you pick up something else, or a penny drops in a slightly different way, or the light bulb shines even brighter.
And
So
that
yeah,
happens for me too. It gives and gives. I was reading a paper about methylation last week, as you do.
as you do. Yeah.
As you do. And I was like, oh gosh, I think I did know that, of course I did, but it just reinforced and you know, reminded me how powerful it is and how important it is, like you said, as a fundamental thing.
Yeah.
You know, we need our methylation merry-go-rounds to be cycling and
to be fluid.
Exactly.
Fluid and productive.
Yes.
So thank you. And yeah, any opportunity you get to hear, listen, watch, please do. I encourage you to do that. So thank you for joining me, Emma. We will see you at our upcoming Beyond Labels masterclass. So that's the next event that we will be working with you. But you have numerous different education on the own Lifecode Gx site as well. So thank you so much for joining us, and we will see you at another event soon.
Thank you very much, Tanya. My pleasure.
The views expressed in this podcast are that of the individual and not intended to be a substitute for professional advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Users should not disregard or delay in obtaining medical advice for any medical condition they may have and should seek the assistance of their healthcare professionals for any such conditions. While we make every effort to ensure that the information we are sharing is accurate, we welcome any comments, suggestions, or correction of errors.